The process of submission, or letting go, is never an easy one. It often feels like surrendering control, walking into uncertainty, or losing something we deeply cherish. However, when we consider the nature and character of the one we are being asked to submit to, the decision becomes clearer and easier to embrace. Take Ruth's story, for example. After Naomi pleaded with her daughters-in-law to return to their people, Orpah turned back, perhaps with a heavy heart. Ruth, on the other hand, had also known and loved her own family, and surely the thought of returning home crossed her mind. But for her, going back was no longer an option. She had come to love Naomi, and more importantly, she had come to know and trust Naomi's God. Ruth made the difficult but deliberate decision to let go of the familiar, her people, her land, her past, and step into an unknown future because of the conviction in her heart. She released everything she had known in order to gain something far greater, the love of her mother-in-law and a relationship with the God of Israel. When it is God Himself requiring us to submit or let go, the challenge may remain, but the reassurance grows. As difficult as it may be to release a person, possession, or position, when we do it in obedience to God's instruction, we are not losing, we are exchanging. What we surrender at His word, He replaces with something better, richer, and more purposeful. We see this in Ruth's life. In choosing to follow Naomi and obey God, Ruth gained so much more than she let go. She found favor with Boaz, was blessed with a loving husband, and although she was a foreigner, she was divinely positioned in the lineage of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. What an incredible testimony to the beauty of submission and obedience. When we hand over our desires to God, even if the situation doesn't make sense at the moment, we place ourselves in the path of unexpected blessings and divine favor. Often, when God asks us to release something, it won't immediately make sense to us the way it does to Him. We might think the place, opportunity, or person He's asking us to leave behind is the best thing that ever happened to us. But we forget, it was God who brought us to that place in the first place, and the same God who led us there is faithful to lead us even further, into something greater. I like to say, we are only able to let go of the big things when God asks us to, because we've already trained ourselves to release the little things. Obedience grows in stages. Letting go when we have little builds the trust we need to let go when we have much. And each act of surrender is a step deeper into God's perfect will. Better things often come to us when we choose to let go. One of the most profound truths about the way God works is that He is more interested in what He does in us than what He gives to us. While we may focus on material gain, achievements, or answered prayers, God's primary concern is our transformation, our growth into Christ-likeness. If God operated by simply granting us everything we thought we needed, without ever requiring anything in return, nothing within us would truly change. We would become like those who live only for food, comfort, or possessions, people who are driven by the temporal rather than the eternal. But our lives as believers are meant to be so much more than that. We are called to live by faith, not by sight. And every time God asks us to let go of something, whether it be a possession, a relationship, a dream, or even a part of ourselves, He is building that faith. He is shaping us to depend less on ourselves and more on Him. Letting go is never a loss in God's economy. Instead, it becomes a tool of refinement, teaching us to be more like Jesus. In the process, we learn to trust God more deeply. We learn to live lives of sacrifice, lives that are no longer centered only on our own needs and desires, but lives that are available for God's purpose and for the benefit of others. Our ultimate calling on earth is to have a vibrant relationship with God and to make His truth known to all people. And the starting point of this mission is surrender. Trusting God enough to place in His hands the very things He asks of us. One of the reasons we may struggle to let go is because we subconsciously begin to value our own efforts above God's grace. This can happen to any of us. We work hard, we wait long, we pray, and labor towards certain blessings. And when they finally come into our hands, it feels counterintuitive, almost unfair, for God to then ask us to surrender what we've worked so hard to receive. But this is where we must remember, it is not our strength that has brought us anything. All that we are and all that we have come by God's grace alone. And once we recognize this, it becomes easier to release what He asks of us, knowing that His grace is sufficient and His plans are always good. Look at Abraham. When he fathered Ishmael, the child brought comfort and joy to his soul. Ishmael was a living, growing boy before Abraham's eyes, and it's understandable that Abraham began to grow attached to the idea that Ishmael could be the fulfillment of God's promise. So much so that he even asked God to bless Ishmael in place of the promised seed. Abraham, like many of us, tried to fit God's promise into his own timeline and expectations. But God had made it clear, Sarah would bear the son through whom the covenant would be fulfilled. At the time Ishmael was born, Abraham was still called Abram, and the full promise of God had not yet been realized. It wasn't until Abram was 99 years old that God reappeared to him, reaffirmed the covenant, and changed his name to Abraham, the father of many nations. This encounter was a reminder that it is God, not human effort, who brings His promises to pass. Even more striking is what happens after Isaac, the promised child, is finally born. God, in an act that tests the very core of Abraham's faith, asks him to sacrifice Isaac, and Abraham agrees. Why? Because by that point, he fully understood that everything he had, every blessing, every promise, every joy, came from God and belonged to God. Abraham had learned to hold everything with open hands, trusting that God never takes without a purpose and never asks for surrender without planning something greater in return. Nothing that happened to Abraham in the Old Testament is easier or harder than the trials we face today as God's children. Though the specifics of our challenges may differ, the purpose behind them remains the same, that Christ may be formed in us. The goal of every test, every trial, and every difficult moment is our transformation into the image of Jesus. In adversity, we are trained to depend wholly on God and to trust in His eternal counsel. Each time we are able to sincerely say, "Not my will, but yours be done," we are learning what it means to truly live the life of faith. The most beautiful part of letting go, when God requires it, is not just the outward results or the rewards we may receive. Yes, God honors obedience and rewards our faithfulness. But more importantly, every time we surrender to His leading, our convictions about God deepen. We come to know Him more. We come to trust Him more. And it is these convictions that strengthen us, sustain us, and carry us through future trials with a new kind of courage and clarity. There are many things I have personally had to let go of in order to remain aligned with God's will for my life. Like Apostle Paul reminded the Corinthian church, all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. Just because something is allowed or seemingly good does not mean it is beneficial for fulfilling God's purpose for us. Take Ruth, for example. It would have been lawful, even reasonable, for her to return to her father's house after Naomi released her. But for her, it wasn't expedient. She chose the path that aligned with God's will for her life, not the one that simply made the most sense on the surface. Learning to understand God's ways, and to accept that they don't always need to make sense to us, makes it easier to let go and trust Him. I've had plans for myself that seemed perfect. They were well thought out, logical, and comfortable. But just when I began to walk in those plans, God would stop me in my tracks and redirect me towards something else, something I hadn't considered. Often, this redirection didn't come with a full picture or a detailed explanation. In those moments, I would wonder why I shouldn't just continue with what felt right to me. But with time, I've learned to see what God had already seen. The bigger picture, the hidden pitfalls, the better outcome that waited on the other side of obedience. Even now, there are still things God has asked of me that I don't fully understand. There are sacrifices I've made, decisions I've taken, and paths I've walked solely because I knew God was leading me that way. And although I don't always see the full reason immediately, I've come to trust that He is faithful. I've come to believe that indeed, He makes all things beautiful in His time. That belief has made it easier, again and again, to say yes to God and to let go of anything He asks of me, no matter how tightly I may be holding on to it. We must never forget, especially in the moments when letting go feels like loss, that we carry God within us. Living with a God-inward consciousness is one of the most powerful ways to deal with the fear, uncertainty, and emotional weight that often accompanies surrender. When we remember that God is with us, not just around us, but within us, it becomes easier to trust that we are not navigating these moments alone. He is the one gently leading us into His perfect will, and we do not have to carry the weight of obedience by ourselves. Each time we let go in obedience, we are making room for something better. God never asks us to release something unless He has something greater in mind. When our hands are already full, it becomes impossible to receive anything new. We must lay aside what we currently hold, whether it's a plan, a relationship, a habit, or even a mindset, in order to take hold of what God is offering. That's why we must not settle for what we already have, especially when God still has more for us, both spiritually and physically. Sometimes we tell ourselves that reading a verse a day or whispering a short prayer is enough. And while those things are good, God may be calling us into deeper waters. Just enough is not always enough, especially when God desires to expand our capacity and reveal more of Himself to us. But greater capacity often requires that we let go of comfort, of routine, and of what we've grown used to. Growth always comes at a cost, but it is always worth it. So the next time your heart wrestles with the idea of letting go, whether it's a dream, a person, a path, or a habit, remember this. If it is God asking, then it is for your good. It may not be easy. It may stretch you and challenge everything you thought you knew. But God will never ask more than He has already equipped you to handle. Trust that He has given you the grace to obey. Trust that He knows what's ahead. And as you choose obedience over comfort, surrender over certainty, and faith over fear, you will be blessed. Amen.